Welcome to the Boxing Basics course. Here we'll just be covering to a basic level footwork, defense, and a couple of punch techniques. You need to have all this in place before you start thinking about sparring or anything like that. All of this kind of stuff and more will be covered in far more detail in future courses, but let's get started with the basics first. All right, so first you're going to make sure your feet are in the right position. Typically, you in the orthodox stance, left foot forward, right foot back. You're going to have if you're stood on a clock face, you're going to have your front foot pointing to about 1 o'clock and your back foot pointing to about 2 o'clock. The weight is distributed more towards the balls of your feet than the heels. Doesn't need to be right up on the toes, but the weights, you should feel like you're ready to move around, and the weights sitting more on the balls of your feet. If you're southpaw, stood the other way around, right leg forward. Again, your feet are going to be roughly in certain positions. The right foot's going to be at around 11 o'clock and the left foot's going to be around at 10 o'clock. Imagining if you're stood on the clock face. All right, so from this position, when you're moving your feet from one place to another, if you're going forwards, you're going to move your front foot first and the back foot an equal amount to maintain the stance. When you go backwards, back foot first, left foot first, and to the right foot first. So if you follow this thing when you're moving around, you'll maintain a good position and maintain stability all the time when you're boxing. All right, so once you've sorted out your stance and you're in the right position regarding your feet, the next thing we're going to have to worry about is the posture and position of your upper body. All right, so a few general rules. You're going to want to try and keep your center of gravity in between your base of support, which is our feet. So we don't want the head to come past the front foot or past the back foot, and we don't want the head to go too far one way so we start to feel like we're going to fall that way, or too far the other way. So every movement you're doing, whether it slips and rolls and stuff, is going to, your head and therefore your center of gravity is going to stay within the base of support created by your stance. And that goes for when we start throwing punches as well. So we're not going to take their head past your front foot. This will create a lot of instability, make you easy to counter, and mean that it's hard to follow up with other punches. So once we've established that and you've got your posture right, then now we'll talk about your arms and shoulders, right? Loads of different guard positions. Some people have their hands down a bit more. Some people have, their hands up really tight. One thing that everyone that does boxing has got to get used to from a beginner's perspective is the elbows, at least being able to tuck in very easily. When you first start, particularly if you've got a bit of muscle in your upper body, it's not going to be natural to tuck your elbows in. You just need to practice this when you're defending, when you're moving around shadow boxing and stuff. It's just being able to tuck them in. You might have one hand down, you might have one hand out there a bit, but just that ability, especially this back elbow here, to tuck it in to your ribs, and ultimately, eventually, it's going to contribute to a better defense to not have the elbows out all the time. In terms of the rest of your upper body, your shoulders, you need to get used to having a slightly hunched posture with your shoulders most of the time. Yeah, so like just pronate your shoulders a bit so they come forward. That's going to make things easier in terms of when you need to block body shots and stuff in the future. You're going to be making your torso a smaller target without losing your posture. So you don't bring your shoulders forward by doing this, because then that doesn't help. You're still going to be open for punches there, open for uppercuts, and we're almost breaking that rule we've already talked about, where we're putting the head over the front foot. When you want to change your posture in terms of hunching your shoulders to make your torso smaller and better for defense and absorbing punches, it's just the upper half, just the top of your spine, just your shoulders pronating the top of your spine there. So get used to, when you're moving around, we're going to talk about movement in the next section of this course. So we've got the feet in the right place, the posture, we're making sure that we don't allow our center of gravity to come outside our base of support, and your shoulders. Just a slightly hunched position with the shoulders. Hands can be in a few different positions as you go along. You'll develop your own style, but everyone has to have the ability to block and defend if they need to, and this elbow is going to have to tuck in. So not out there. Even if you find it hard initially, start learning to tuck that elbow in. Okay, so once you've got your feet and your hands in the right place, we'll talk about movement. And we'll just establish a few simple rules and principles for when you're moving around the ring that will help you stay in a good position. Right, so first one will be never allow your feet to come close together. Right, we already talked about how if you move forward, front foot first, back foot first, etc. And that's really to do with this, right? So if I was going to move that way, I'd move this leg first. If I did it the other way around, my feet will come close together. So we want to avoid any moments of instability, and that's what you're going to get when your feet come close together, right? So stick to that rule that we already talked about, where whichever way you're moving, you're going to move the foot on that side first, or forwards and backwards. Same principles apply, right? So don't let the feet come together. That's the first rule. The second one is don't let the feet cross over. So we can keep the feet away from each other, and we can still cross the feet over, right? Like this. Again, we want to be stable all the time to be able to hit and to be able to defend and do whatever we need to do, so we can't be moving like this. So don't cross the feet over. And the third basic one is just an easy one that you can keep track of yourself just by listening when you're moving around the ring and practicing or out on the gym floor, is your feet shouldn't really make any noise. Yeah, no scraping. If your feet are scraping and you can hear the noise of your feet scraping around the floor, then that's going to slow you down. And we're working with fairly fine margins in this sport, you know, split seconds. So you want things to be as smooth and fast as possible. So those three rules: when you're moving around, feet shouldn't come close together, feet shouldn't cross over, and feet shouldn't make very much noise. You shouldn't really be able to hear them, right? They shouldn't be scraping and stuff like that. Yeah. And then while we're moving around, the postural stuff and keeping your center of gravity in between your feet links in with movement, all right? So when we're moving around the ring, we want at any moment to be able to change direction and obviously stop and throw punches. If we're moving around and maybe we're slipping and parrying people's punches, and we start to lose that center of gravity, that principle of keeping the center of gravity within your base of support. So we move this way, my feet aren't coming close together and my feet aren't crossing, so I've obeyed the rules we talked about footwork. But look, my posture isn't very good, my center of gravity is coming outside my foot. So now I don't have a choice, I have to move that way. And if my opponent knows which way I'm going to move, that narrows things down for them, and then they can walk me onto punches. So I want to keep my center of gravity always in between my base of support, so that anytime I move, I can change direction. I'm not going too far forward with it. Again, just like the lateral stuff we just saw there, I don't want to go too far forward with it, because again, if I'm attacking someone and I go too far forward and I've missed the punch, I've got no choice. I can't step back. I have to go forwards because my weight is taking me that way. Or too far backwards, leaning back from a punch, for example, and leaning too far backwards, because then I don't have a choice. I have to keep going backwards and potentially get pinned on the ropes or something like that. So those three rules: feet don't come close together, feet don't cross, feet don't make noise and scrape. And then bring the postural stuff we talked about before into your movement when you're practicing in shadow boxing as a beginner, so that you can always change direction and always stay still to punch, plant your feet, because of your control of your body weight, keeping it within your base of support. So when you start rolling and slipping, you're not going to go all the way over here. So make sure you can do things at a milliseconds notice and change direction. If you're attacking someone and going forward, you can immediately step back because you didn't let your head come too far forward. All right, so that's kind of the basic stuff to do with your movement as a beginner in boxing. We've covered your foot position, so your feet need to be in a position as close to that as possible. We've talked about your posture and your upper body, your shoulders and your arms. Try your best to follow those things. And we've just talked about movement. So how you apply those things while you're moving around. All right, so now we'll go through the first punch that any boxer needs to learn how to throw, and that's the jab. Right, so you're in your stance. Your jab is your front hand. It's always the one that's closest to your opponent. And as a general rule, you shouldn't really be too concerned about throwing other punches until your jab at least starts reaching the target, whether the opponent's blocking it or not. When your jab starts either hitting them or hitting their gloves or even their shoulders, then you know you've established the first kind of requirement in order to attack someone, and that is the range, the distance, the correct distance to start unloading attacks. So we're going to go through how to throw the jab. But the first thing we're going to talk about is the footwork for the jab. And there's going to be 3 different steps that you're going to learn, and then we're going to learn about the upper body and what the arm does when you're throwing the jab, and then we're going to link the footwork with that to learn a realistic jab that you should be able to start implementing fairly soon. All right, so the different footwork things we're going to learn is this, right? You need to, your arms aren't involved yet, yeah? You need to be able to do this. Step forward, yeah? So you need to be able to do a step forward, right? Just like we've discussed in the basic footwork section of this course, weights on the balls of the feet. The feet may look a bit flat, but the weights on the balls of the feet prime to move forward. And you get faster and faster doing that step. Really simple. One foot and the other foot. Right. The next one is the same thing, but it's only the front foot moving. Through varying distances. So you might go a bit further, might be very short. And again, the weight is kind of primed on the balls of the feet to push in. I say balls of the feet because obviously it's on the front foot as well, so that we can get back out. Equally, when we do the first one, the front foot is pushing you back out, the back foot is pushing you in, and both feet, the weight is more distributed towards the balls of the feet, right? The third step, which we're going to link into how to throw the jab in a bit, it is a bounce. So in this one, both feet are coming off the floor at the same time, both landing at pretty much the same time. All right, so the first one was a step in. The second one was a half step in. And the third one was a bounce in. All right, so you need to practice these 3 steps. You can put them into your shadow boxing and then get faster and faster at them. And you need to be able to modify the distance, because obviously that's going to be based on how far you need to travel to throw your jab. So when you're practicing these steps, move around, and we'll do the step in first. Just a little step in, a bigger step in, an even bigger one. Then we'll do a half step, really small one, bigger one, and we do the bounce in. Sometimes really small, sometimes a little bit bigger. Just so you're practicing these techniques along with the control you're going to need to use them in reality. Right, So before we go on to actually throwing the jab in a realistic way, we'll talk about what your upper body needs to do when you're throwing a jab, right? So when you throw the jab, in terms of your torso and stuff like that, so your upper body, other than your arm itself, you're not going to need to rotate loads to throw the jab like you would if you threw a cross, right? When you throw the jab, you haven't got time to do all that. And remember, the jab is like a key to unlock other attacks. So once we've thrown the jab, we want to be in a position where we can carry on and do other attacks. We don't want to do this, because then we can't do anything else after that immediately, right? And there will be some exceptions, but at the moment, just this is the beginner's course, so just the basic jab is here. Okay, so the next part of this we're going to need to address is what your arm does when you're throwing the jab. We've talked about the footwork. That is arguably the most important part, and the arm's slightly easier, but there are still some details to help you throw the most effective jab possible, right? So talk about a starting position first. You need your jab in hand to be starting in a position where it's going to get to the target in the most efficient and fastest way possible, right? So particularly if you had a longer reach than your opponent, you don't want your hands to be in close to your face any more than necessary, right? So as close to the target as possible, right? Not too high, right? Not in a position where, not too high, because then you're going to have to either punch them on top of the head, which is not going to do the damage you want, or you're going to have to pull your arm back and then throw the shot, or pull your arm down and then throw the shot. So we want it directly level with where you're going to throw it, right? Also, don't put your jab in hand across your body like this if you're going to throw the jab, because again, you can't recruit your chest muscles, you can't get any real power in it. It needs to be in a position where it's ready to throw, right? So that's your starting position regarding your arms, right? Then as you throw the shot, you're going to begin, this is the upper body, then we're going to link the lower body into it, but in terms of what your arm does now, you're going to start to extend your arm, and then as your arm starts to straighten, you're going to turn at the shoulder until on impact your palm is facing the floor or thereabouts. You've slightly rotated your torso, only slightly, and you're trying to make sure that you hit the target with the pressure on the top middle finger knuckle, as opposed to being on the fingers. You can feel that in the glove. When you're hitting like that, you shouldn't feel loads of pressure on the kind of middle knuckles. You should feel all the pressure on that, the top row of knuckles, particularly that middle one, the one that sticks out the most, right? So on those points, right? The rotation in your upper body, right? So if you over rotate like this when you throw a jab, yeah, and there are some exceptions, and we'll go into that in the more advanced courses in the future. But this being just a beginner's guide to the jab, most of the beginners guide to everything, but on the jab now, just a basic jab. You're not going to over rotate, because the main function of your jab, it's obviously a punch that can cause damage and score points, but the main function of it is to start opening your opponent up to other attacks, right? So if we commit so much to the jab and rotate like this, then we're unlikely to be able to follow up with things very quickly, because we've changed our position so much from our original kind of neutral boxing stance and posture. All right, so you don't need too much torso rotation. The majority of the power you're going to get from the jab is going to come, at least at a basic level, from one of those steps that we practiced in the previous section. All right, so that's your torso. Right, turning the hand over. So anyone that's ever been coached how to throw a jab has probably heard turn your jab over, turn your hand over, right? Your hand turning over shouldn't be done on its own. So you're not going to pronate your wrist at all. You're not going to pronate your wrist. It's not that. your hand is turning over as a symptom of your shoulder internally rotating. So it's you turn your hand because you turn your shoulder. You don't turn your hand because you turn your wrist, because then we're going to have a weak elbow, weak shoulder, and not get the same power in the shot. And it'll be harder for us to put that pressure on the top middle finger knuckle, right? So we turn the shoulder when we throw the jab. The shoulder is, the turn is at the shoulder. You keep your wrist completely still. You're not going to pronate your wrist at all. This is staying still, being stable. And as you throw the shot, after you start to extend, you turn your shoulder for maximum stability when the punch lands. All right. So the starting position, so that you can get the jab to the target as efficiently as possible. So hand not any further back than it needs to be, no higher than it needs to be. Don't bring your hand across your body when you're getting ready to throw a jab, because then it has to again take a kind of indirect route to the target. And then the sort of basic chain of movement with your upper body is extend your arm, then turn your hand over by turning your shoulder. All right, so we've talked about the footwork required for the jab and what the upper body's going to do, and now we're going to put the two together. All right, so you want to be trying to follow these coaching points that we've talked about with both the feet and the upper body as much as possible, right? And essentially what we're going to try and do it from a beginner's perspective, and we'll go through this in more detail in the more advanced courses, but essentially what you're going to try and do with those two parts is just put them together and have them happening at the same time, right? So if we go back to the first step, this one, there's the step forward, right? And you're going to throw the jab at the same time as you're stepping forward. Then we got the half step, same thing, at the same time. And then we've got the bounce at the same time. All right. So you've got the position you're supposed to be in. Then you've got your posture to worry about. Then we spoke about the footwork for the jab, and then the upper body for the jab. And you're trying to link all those things together. All right, so now that you've got those basics in place, now you can shadow box in order to practice that and eventually make it natural and be able to do those things without thinking. When you're moving around shadow boxing as a beginner, focus on the things we've already discussed: your stance, the way you're supposed to move around, your posture in terms of your center of gravity being always within your base of support, which is your stance that you've got in place, and the jab, which is the most important punch in boxing, and it's kind of the key that unlocks all your other attacks. All right, so you've been moving around, making sure you can change direction at any time because your center of gravity is in control. Trying those 3 steps, make sure they're completely distinct from each other, stepping in with both feet. So you may need this step if you're chasing after someone and they're going backwards, because you may need to then do a double, or you may need to just come after them after you've done that first step. And then the half step, if you've got an opponent who's kind of stationary, maybe they're trapped on the ropes, but you don't feel like they're going to move back and they're not moving back at the time, often a half step is much better. Even if you launch other attacks from there, it's good to have that quick getting out of range or coming back there. And then the bounce, it's not something that was ever in my repertoire, but a lot of people do box with this, bouncing in and out, and then obviously you can add other attacks to that as well. Right, so as a beginner, when you're moving around shadow boxing at home, in the gym, or even on the punch bags, you want to be focusing on those things that we've covered in this course, which are your stance, making sure you follow those rules, feet aren't coming together, feet aren't crossing over, feet aren't making loads of scraping noises, we're sticking to those coaching points about the posture and your center of gravity being within your base of support, never leaning too far forward. Your head should not be past your foot, never leaning too far back, and never moving too far one way or the other. You can test that out by constantly changing direction and moving around when you're shadow boxing. You should at any point be able to perform any of the techniques, any of the basic techniques in the sport. So you should be able to move left at any time if you're moving right, and vice versa. You should never be fixed to go one way. And then finally, we went through throwing the jab, all right? So making sure you're sticking to all those things when you're shadow boxing, all right? You can throw other punches, but as a beginner, your other punches are probably going to be a bit crap right now, all right? But the jab, you can just make sure, even if you start slowly, you're throwing it correctly, in time with the foot movement, and making sure that you turn the arm over in the correct way through the shoulder, making sure that you hold your jab in a position where it's going to reach the target in a really efficient manner, so not across the body, not higher than it needs to be, not lower than it needs to be either. And there will be exceptions, but those are more advanced, and we're going to cover that stuff in future videos. So hopefully this gives you a kind of good sort of starting point, and some kind of fundamental coaching points to try and stick to as you start, you start becoming better at boxing. In the next part of this beginner's course, we're going to cover some basic defenses to the jab and straight punches. But make sure for now you just start practicing these things we've already gone through. Stance, footwork, position and posture, and the jab.